Good morning. Welcome to Get Licensed to Build. This is a free online workshop for those who want to get their California contractor's license. Our goal this morning is to go through all the parts of the license application and give you practical tips to help you complete it correctly and to give you every opportunity to demonstrate your experience and qualifications to get your California contractor's license. We will also help you get you ready for your licensing exams and give you a link to a video that shows you exactly what to expect on your test day. Today's webcast is presented by the Contractor State License Board, the government agency responsible for regulating the California's construction industry. I'm Dana D'Onofrio from CSLB's License Verification Unit at CSLB. Joining us is Lavinia Peavy from CSLB's License Verification Unit. Good morning.
Good morning. CSLB is overseen by a 15-member board that is direct administrative policies for our operations. Our board is made up of 10 public members, including one labor representative, one local building official, and one representative of a statewide senior citizen organization, and five contractors. Appointments are made by the governor and the state legislature.
Next slide. Please note, CSLB authorized test centers are open. It is recommended that applicants wear masks on test day. Before arriving for your test, check and follow your local COVID-19 mask guidance. If you're watching right now on either YouTube Live or Facebook Live and want to ask questions, you'll need to join us on WebEx. There's a banner with a link on the top of our homepage, which is www.cslb.ca.gov. That is also where you can download this presentation to follow along. The presentation files includes clickable bonus links that appear on slides throughout this workshop. We're going to present a lot of information today, so don't worry if you don't get it all. We will archive the video of this workshop and put it on our YouTube channel. You can go back and watch later. Next slide. To ask a question on WebEx, use the question and answer feature, not the chat feature, on the bottom right of your screen. Make sure you send your questions to all panelists. Finally, we tend to get a lot of questions during these workshops on how you document your work experience and what credit you can get for your education or military service. Those questions are fine, and we would ask that you wait to send us those questions until after you see that part of the workshop. We will go through your questions at the end of our presentation, which should last about 45 minutes.
Next slide. The information obtained during this webcast is not, nor is intended to be legal advice. While this webcast contains general information, including legal guidelines for contractor license applications, it does not contain definitive statements of the law and may not reflect the most current legal developments in the construction industry. Such guidelines communicated or discussed during the webcast are for informational purposes only. If you have any questions about the application of the law for specific situations, you should contact an attorney who is familiar with the contractor construction law or review the 2022 edition of the CSLB publication, California Contractor's License Law and Reference Book. You can now download it for free on the CSLB website or purchase it directly from the publisher LexisNexis. There are links for both at the bottom of the screen.
Next slide. Here is a list of what we are going to cover today. We will take you through the process for applying for your California contractor's license. First, who needs a license? Why get a contractor's license? The minimum qualifications you'll need to get a license and what credits you might qualify for. The types of business entities. The different CSLB license classifications, including our new B2 residential remodeling classification. We will spend a lot of time giving you tips on how to help fill out your applications, including how to demonstrate your work experience to meet the minimum qualifications. Fingerprint requirements for a criminal background check. We will help you get you ready for an exam or exams you need to pass in order to get your license. And finally, the other things you'll need to have in place before your license is issued, things like bond and insurance.
Next slide. First, we'll take a look at who needs a license. Here in California, a state contractor's license is needed for all construction projects priced at $500 or more. The total includes both labor and materials. The law doesn't let you break down the project into $499 pieces. It is the entire project. Also, you can't charge an hourly rate to get around the $500 threshold. If the hourly cost times the number of hours for the job totals $500 or more, you need a contractor's license. So what is the definition of a contractor? The definition comes from the state's Business and Professions Code. In this case, it's sections 7026.1. We've got a link to that code at the top of the page if you download the presentation. I'll read the entire code, but pay special attention to the part we underlined. A contractor is any person, consultant to an owner builder, firm, association, organization,
This meeting is being recorded.
partnership, business trust, corporation, or company who or which undertakes, offers to undertake, purports to have the capacity to undertake, or submits a bid to construct any building or home improvement project or part thereof. In other words, you don't have to do the work to break the law. You must have a contractor's license just to advertise that you can do the construction work, or even to give a bid for a construction job if the bid totals $500 or more.
Next slide. So you may be asking yourself, why should I get a license? Here are a few good reasons. First, you can take pride in being a licensed professional. It shows you've taken the steps to get licensed and you're serious about your career choice. It allows you to make valuable contributions to your local community. Unlicensed contractors must operate in the shadows and cannot help make their community a better place to live. Next, it follows you to get paid for the work you do. It allows you to get paid for the work that you do. There is value to the work done by a licensed professional. Being licensed also gives you legal options if customers don't pay you. Unlicensed contractors do not have a legal right to take someone to court to get paid because the work requires a license and they weren't licensed to do the work in the first place. Also, you would be able to use the mechanics lien laws. Next, you don't have to look over your shoulder with fear of getting caught. Contracting without a valid California license can lead to misdemeanor charges. Those caught face a first offense sentence of up to 6 months in jail and or a $5,000 fine, and potential administrative fines anywhere between $200 to $15,000. Subsequent violations can result in increased criminal penalties and fines. In addition, you may face felony charges if you contract without a license when one is required in a state or federally declared disaster area, or if you try to pass yourself off as a licensed contractor by illegally using a license number. Remember, there are no education requirements to get a license. Also, you do not have to go to a license preparation school to get your contractor's license.
Next slide. So what do you need to get a license? First, it is important to understand that CSLB does not license individuals. We license companies or businesses, also called entities. Many entities are one-person operations, but know that every entity, even a one-person operation, must have a qualifier. That's someone who has the minimum experience and is responsible for the operations of the company. Here is a short list of minimum qualifications you will need. You must be at least 18 years old. You must have either a valid Social Security number or valid Individual Taxpayer Identification Number, or ITIN. You can qualify the license in one of two ways. First, you can qualify the license by having at least 4 years experience within the last 10 years as a journey person, foreperson, supervising employee, or contractor in the trade being applied for. Or you can also get a qualifier for the license who has that required experience. We will spend a lot of time talking about how you can demonstrate your experience on your application in a few minutes.
Next slide. It may be possible for you to substitute your education, technical training, and apprenticeship training for some of the required experience. We tend to get a lot of questions on this. First, CLB cannot prejudge your experience. Due to the number of applications we receive and process every month, we don't have the staff time that would be needed to prejudge your experience. We can only review your documents after you apply for your license. Next, to get education credit, the coursework must be directly related to the work you will be doing as a contractor. Your education cannot be substituted for more than 3 years or 36 months of the required experience, meaning you will need at least 1 year of practical experience if you get the full 36 months of education credit. To apply for education credit, you must provide CSLB with written documentation. That means a copy of any apprenticeship completion certificates you earned, or get official technical school or college transcripts. Have your transcripts mailed to you. Do not open the envelope, leave it sealed, and include it with your CSLB applications packet. Note, high school courses will not earn you any credit towards your contractor's license.
Next slide. If you are looking to get education credit to meet the 4 years or 48 months of experience, you'll need to get your transcripts first. This is the most important slide of this entire workshop. This is the kind of credit you can expect to receive for your education. Note that for some areas, we are only giving you averages. You will see that your credit will be determined on a case-by-case basis. We're not going to be able to give you any more guidance than what you see on this slide. So our best advice is do not rely on the combination of your experience and education credits to barely hit the 4-year experience mark. There is always the real possibility that you will not get as much education credit as you were hoping. Let's go through the chart from the most credit you can get to the least. The most education credit you can get is for a Bachelor of Science degree in construction management. That degree will get you the full 36 months of credit. Next is a master's or bachelor's degree in business or a law degree. Any one of those will get you 24 months of credit. An associate in science degree in construction management will get you 18 months credit. A bachelor degree in some other major will get you an average of 18 months credit. An associate degree in a major besides construction management will get you an average of 6 months credit. Credit for individual college classes are given on a case-by-case basis, usually with a maximum of 6 months credit. Apprenticeship completion certificates will give you 24 to 36 months, depending on the classification of the program. For example, a sheet metal worker apprenticeship gets you 24 months of credit for the C20, HVAC, and C43 sheet metal classifications only. A lineman apprenticeship gets you 36 months in a C7 low voltage and a C10 electrical classifications only. If you have transcripts for other technical training you've taken, you might be able to get some minimal credit as well. Again, don't use your education credit to try and squeak by the 4-year or 48-month requirement.
Next slide. If you served in the military, some of that service might count as well. On the bottom of the page, you'll see a bonus link to our CSLB Military Application Assistance Program where you can learn more. The license qualifier must also pass 2 different exams, both taken on a computer at one of CSLB's authorized test centers. One exam is on California business law. The other is in the specific trade covered by the license. We also have limited specialty licenses, which we will discuss later. Those licenses only require the qualifier to take the law and business exam. Next slide. As we mentioned, the qualifier is the one who must take and pass the required exams or qualify for a waiver. We are not going to spend a lot of time on the waiver, only to note that you might be able to request a waiver from taking one or both exams in very specific situations. We recommend that you look at the CSLB website for more information on those specific situations. We have included a bonus link at the bottom of the page. The qualifier must also undergo a criminal background check. We will go more in depth on that in a few minutes. After the license is issued, the qualifier must be in a position to exercise direct supervision and control of the company's operations. They are also responsible for all workmanship issues. It is also important to note that if you are trying to get a B general building contractor license and you hire subcontractors to work under you, you are responsible as the project's prime contractor for the work that they do.
Next slide. The next thing you're going to need to determine before applying for your license is which type of entity your business will be. There are 4 types. First is a sole ownership, where the owner or responsible managing employee may serve as a license qualifier. Just about 2/3 of the contracting businesses in California are sole ownerships. Second, a corporation, where either of the current officers designated as the responsible managing officer or the responsible managing employee may serve as qualifier. Just under 1/3 of our licensees are corporations. A distant third is a partnership, where either of the general partners or a responsible managing employee may serve as qualifier. That's 2% of our licensees. Finally, a limited liability company or LLC, where a responsible managing member, responsible managing manager, responsible managing officer, or responsible managing employee may serve as qualifier. About 1.5% of California construction companies are LLCs.
Next slide. Now let's talk about license classifications. A contractor's license can include multiple classifications, although you must select one when filling your application. While there are more than 40 license classifications in California, they all fall under 3 distinct categories. There is a bonus link to our classifications list at the bottom of the screen. First is Class A or general engineering contractors. These are contractors who deal with fixed works that require specialized engineering, knowledge, and skill. A contractors are the ones who build projects such as freeways, skyscrapers, and dams. Today, there are over 19,000 A contractors in the state of California. Next is Class B, or general building contractors. This is the largest class of contractors in California with more than 133,000. B contractors have a principal business dealing with any structure built, being built, or to be built that requires, as part of its construction, at least 2 unrelated building trades or crafts. In other words, a B contractor shouldn't take a prime contract for any project involving trades other than framing or carpentry unless the prime contract requires at least 2 unrelated building trades other than framing or carpentry. There is no limitation on a B contractor to stop them from taking on projects that only include framing or carpentry. The final class is C, or specialty contractors. These licenses are for construction work that requires special skill and whose principal contracting business involves the use of specialized building trades or crafts. Examples from this class include C10 electrical contractors, C20 HVAC contractors, C27 landscaping contractors, C36 plumbing contractors, C39 roofing contractors, C46 solar contractors, and C53 swimming pool contractors, just to name a few. There are also 30 limited specialty classes under the C61 classification. These include the C61, D34 prefabricated equipment class. More than 209,000 contractors hold a C class in California.
Next slide. CSLB's newest licensing classification is called the B2 Residential Remodeling Classification. The B2 allows contractors who don't have structural framing experience to get a license with CSLB. Here's the interested applicant Here's what interested applicants need to know. B2 license holder must engage in 3 or more trades or crafts on a residential project. B2 licensees also are limited to work on existing residential wood-framed structures. There are some things B2 license holders cannot do. They cannot make structural alterations to load-bearing partitions and walls. They cannot install or extend electrical or plumbing systems. They can make modifications to existing systems, for example, install recessed lighting or alter plumbing for 2 shower heads. B2 licensees also cannot install or replace an HVAC system. Like all other CSLB licensees, B2 applicants or licensees must comply with the CSLB experience examination, license bond, and workers' compensation insurance requirements. If you have more questions about the B2 license, email the licensing division at licensing@cslb.ca.gov.
Next slide. When you are ready to apply for a license, here are the 2 forms that you will need. On the left is the license application. On the right is a certification of work experience. You can get these forms on the CSLB website. There is a bonus link on the bottom left side of the page, so be sure to download this presentation. We will give you a closer look at the different sections of these forms a little later.
Next slide. Okay, now let's break down the steps of the application process. First, identify who will be the qualifier for your license. That person will be responsible for exercising direct supervision and control of the company. If you're using an RME or a responsible managing employee as your qualifier, determine if he or she can qualify for the exam waiver. Be aware the companies you pay to connect you with a licensed qualifier. In some cases, these qualifiers are in a different part of the state and cannot exercise the direct supervision needed, or they aren't willing or don't understand their role as a qualifier. Next, make sure you complete the correct application. There are 2 options. 1, application for original contractor's license. 2, application for original contractor's license - examination waiver 7065. We've got links to both at the bottom of this page.
Next slide. The next step is to determine your company name. Take a look at the application for examples. Some things to keep in mind. Your name cannot be misleading or imply that you qualify for a license classification other than what you are getting. For example, if you're going to apply for a C36 plumbing license, you cannot have company of John Smith Plumbing Construction, Heating, and Drywall. Corporate and LLC names must match exactly the name registered with the California Secretary of State's office. Every person who is an officer, responsible manager, or member, or director of a corporation or limited liability company shall be listed on the application as a member of the personnel of record for the license. You can also use what is called a DBA, which stands for doing business as. The main things to remember here is the DBA name cannot be misleading, and you must use that name in all advertising and on all of your contracts. Next slide. Next, you will want to get together certifications to support your work experience. You should do this even if you apply for an exam waiver. Feel free to use multiple pages if necessary. Next, be sure to note if you are a military veteran. Some of your military service may be used to meet your 4 years of experience qualifications. Also, your application may be expedited and receive a possible 50% reduction in the initial licensing fee through our Military Application Assistance Program. We mentioned that a few minutes ago. There is a bonus link at the bottom of the screen for more information on that program. To participate, you must have not been dishonorably discharged, so be sure to include a copy of your latest DD-214 long form paperwork showing your discharge status with your application. The next couple of items are basic but important. Proofread your application for any missing information. Make sure you've provided an answer to all necessary fields. Second, don't forget to sign and date your application. Finally, determine if you need a special accommodation to take your exams. If so, complete a request form and submit it with your application. We'll talk about the use of translators a little later.
Next slide. Next, let's take a closer look at our fingerprinting requirements, which are used for a criminal background check. This is a list of those who must submit a full set of fingerprints to CSLB depending on the type of business entity. All applicants, each corporate officer, each partner, each owner, the responsible managing employee, all home improvement salesperson, each manager and member. If you are in California, you must submit fingerprints electronically with what's called a live scan. You can get an updated list of live scan locations in California broken down by county on the Attorney General's website. We have a link here, or you can simply go to the Attorney General's website and search for live scan. You will also see we have a bonus link at the bottom of the screen to the fingerprint information page on our CSLB website. Next slide. If you're out of state, it's going to be tough for you to get us your fingerprints. That's because you must submit hard copies of them, the old-fashioned way. Those take anywhere between 3 to 6 months for the FBI and Department of Justice to process. So you might want to consider traveling to California to get your electronic live scan done here.
Next slide. So what happens if you have any criminal convictions? CSLB may deny your application for license for the following reasons. First, if your conviction is substantially related to the duties, functions, and qualifications of a contractor. Also, if your conviction involves fraud or a violent crime. There are other factors CSLB also considers. They are the nature and severity of the crimes, the amount of time that has passed since a conviction, and any evidence of rehabilitation that you submit to CSLB. CSLB evaluates felony criminal convictions which occurred within 7 years of the application date. For misdemeanor criminal convictions, we will look back for 3 years of the application date. That's unless the convictions are for a violent felony, certain sexual crimes, or financial crimes related to construction. CSLB denies only 1% of the total applications we get based on criminal convictions. You'll also note the bonus link to our fingerprint information page.
Next slide. Okay, along with the education credits we talked about earlier, this next section is probably the most important of the entire workshop and the part of the application that causes the most headaches for applicants. It is how you demonstrate your work experience on your application. Remember, the license qualifier needs 4 years or 48 months of experience within the past 10 years in the classification for which you are applying. The experience must be at no less than a journeyman level or as a foreman, supervising employee, contractor, or owner builder. The journeyman is defined as an experienced worker who is fully qualified as opposed to a trainee and can perform trade without supervision or one who has completed an apprenticeship program.
Next slide. There's a limited amount of space on the application to show your certified work experience. So feel free to use additional pages if needed and simply attach them at the end of the work experience form. Use as many certifications of work experience forms as you need to prove the required 4 years of experience within the last 10 years. Use a different form for each certifier. Be as accurate as possible. Make sure the person certifying your work describes the actual work you performed and the dates in which you performed them. We will now share some examples of both good and unacceptable descriptions to demonstrate work experience. Do not copy and paste this information directly into your application. These are just examples.
Next slide. At the top of this chart is the classification and type of experience you're trying to demonstrate. The first example is journey person experience. The overall theme we'll keep repeating is the more specific the description, the better. Note, the work experience form should be completed by your certifier, someone who has knowledge and has observed your work experience for the classification you are applying for. That person does not have to be a licensed contractor.
Next slide. Our first example is for the Class B general building contractor. The best type of description your certifier would use for journey person experience is to be specific. Journey person experience must include hands-on work like this. Bob performed rough and finish carpentry, concrete forming and pours, rough out, plumbing and electrical, interior, exterior painting, and flooring on residential homes. Next slide. An unacceptable description would be something generic like residential general building trades. Next slide. For four-person experience, the description must include some hands-on work and/or supervisory work. Here's an example of the best type of description. Bob oversees other staff at job site performing rough and finish carpentry, concrete forming and pours, rough out plumbing and electrical, interior and exterior painting, and flooring on residential homes. Next slide. Again, an unacceptable description would be something generic like residential general building trades. Next slide. For supervising employee experience, the description should include an explanation of how you arrived at a supervisor level. An example is, as a contractor lead, as a construction lead on multiple projects, Bob supervised rough and finish carpentry, concrete forming and pours, rough out plumbing and electrical, interior and exterior painting, and flooring on residential homes. Next slide. Again, unacceptable would be something like residential general building trades. Next slide. For out-of-state contractor experience, the description must include examples of work done that were out of state, military, or on federal lands, or work for a government entity. Applicants can qualify as a journey person, four-person, or supervising employee. A tip is to be specific about your duties and employment circumstances.
Next slide. Our next example is for the C27 landscaping contractor for experience at the journeyman level. The best type of description your certifier would use would be: Jane performed landscape construction, maintenance, and installation of sprinklers, ground plants, low voltage lighting, ornamental yard art, concrete mow strips, and pathways, and tree pruning. Next slide. An unacceptable explanation would be gardening, yard maintenance, planting. Next slide. For a C27 landscaping contractor, the best work experience description for a four-person would be something like: Jane oversaw other staff at job site performing landscape construction, maintenance and installation of sprinklers, ground plants, low voltage lighting, ornamental yard art, concrete mow strips, and pathways and tree pruning. Next slide. An unacceptable description again would be something like gardening, yard maintenance, planting. Next slide. For a C27 supervising employee, the description should include an explanation of how you arrived at the supervisor level. The best description would be: as a construction lead on multiple projects, applicant supervised landscape construction, maintenance, and installation of sprinklers, ground plants, low voltage lighting, ornamental yard art, concrete mowed strips, and pathways and tree pruning. Next slide. Unacceptable here for the supervising employee would also be something like gardening, yard maintenance, planting. Next slide. Finally, for out-of-state contractors, the same guidance that we showed you for general building contractors is required. Be sure to include examples of your out-of-state work, as well as work for the military, on federal lands, or for a government entity. Be sure to be specific when you describe your duties and employment circumstances.
Next slide. By law, CSLB must randomly review and verify all the information provided on at least 3% of all applications. Our next 3 slides run down the acceptable documentation you can use to support your work experience in the event that your application was selected and you were asked to provide additional documentation. The supporting documentation should not be mailed in with your application. You will only need to provide this information if requested by CSLB staff. On the lower right of your screen, you'll see a link to the publication on our website, along with additional information on experience documentation. If you look at the chart, you can see the first column is for documents that you can use if you were employed by a licensed contractor. The second column is for documenting your experience if you've been self-employed. The third column is for documentation you will need if you are applying for a Class B general building contractor license and need to use owner builder experience to meet the experience requirements. Next slide. Here's the next page of acceptable documentation. Again, you can click on the link to view the print this publication. Next slide. If you do not have this information readily available, you may want to begin to gather it now, just in case you are asked to provide it in the future. Remember, you are trying to demonstrate 4 years of experience within the last 10 years. CSLB staff may contact the certifier of experience or other parties to verify experience.
Next slide. One other note, CSLB gets more than 1,000 applications each month, so our application processing staff has seen it all. They've got 2 pieces of advice. First, don't cut and paste from this presentation. Also, don't try to get around having to take the trade test by applying for multiple subcategories under the C61 limited specialty classification. Okay, that is the content you'll need to fill out your application. Before getting into it, CSLB, double check it and before getting it to CSLB, double check it to make sure you did not miss anything. Be sure to sign and date it as well. And don't forget to include the all-important $450 application fee. You'll pay the initial licensing fee of $200 for a sole owner license or $350 for a non-sole owner license after you pass your exam or exams. Then you put your application packet into the mail to CSLB or hand deliver to one of our public counters. We've got a bonus link at the bottom of the screen with our office locations.
Next slide. Parts of the application, Section 1, business name and address. Now that we have gone through the information you'll need to include, here's a closer look at the application so you can see where the information goes. Section 1 is where you list your business name. Remember, when selecting a business name, make sure the name that you have selected is compatible with the classification and the entity that you are applying for and is not misleading. If your business is a corporation or LLC, you will need to make sure that the name that you provide in this section matches exactly the business name registered with the California Secretary of State's office. In line 2, you will indicate what classification you are applying for. The mailing address and phone number that you list on line 3A and 3C will be made public on CSLB's website once you are licensed. Next slide. Parts of the application, Section 2, business entity. In Section 2, you will select your business entity. If you are applying for a corporation or LLC, you will need to provide your registration number provided to you by the California Secretary of State's office. Make sure you pay extra attention to the instructions in this section pertaining to the entity for which you are applying.
Next slide. Parts of the application, Section 3. Qualifying individual full legal name and address. In Section 3, you will list the qualifier's information. Remember, the qualifier is the person that meets the experience requirements and will be responsible for the direct supervision and control of the construction operations. The qualifier will be the person taking the exams. On line 6, you will list any previous or current license numbers you've held. You will also need to list the percentage of the new business owned by the qualifier. For example, if you are the only person that will be listed on the license, you would enter 100%. On line 7, you will need to indicate what position will be held by the qualifier. Each entity has a different personnel requirement. You will need to make sure that you have listed all positions depending on the entity that you have selected. You can find more information on this on page 2 through 4 of the application instructions. Line 8 is where you will sign and date the application. Next slide. Parts of the application, Section 4, personnel full legal names and addresses. Section 4 is where you will list the personnel information for all remaining personnel that will be listed on the license. For example, if you are applying for a corporation, you will need to indicate who will be the responsible managing officer or employee, president, secretary, and treasurer. Again, more information can be found on page 4 of the application instructions. If you will have more than 4 people on your license, you can make additional copies of this page and include it with your application. For corporations and LLCs, every person who is an officer, responsible manager, or member, manager, member, or director of a corporation or limited liability company shall be listed on the application as a member of the personnel of records for the license. All personnel that will be listed on the license must sign the application in Section 4.
Next slide. Section 5 is a series of yes and no questions, so we're not going to cover those here. Parts of the application, Section 6, qualifier education, apprenticeship, licensure, and military. You may be granted credit towards your 4-year experience requirement based on your education. Question 17 asks if you have completed an education or apprenticeship program. You will need to submit official, sealed transcripts if you would like to be considered for this credit. If you attended formal training or an apprenticeship program, you will need to provide a certificate of completion. Get those sealed transcripts mailed to you, then include the sealed transcripts with your application packet. Do not have the program send transcripts directly to CSLB. You don't want to take a chance that we were not able to match them up with your application. CSLB may grant you up to 3 years of credit based on your education. This credit is not on a year-to-year basis, meaning if you have a 2-year college degree, you won't necessarily be granted 2 years of credit towards the experience requirement. You may qualify for this credit regardless of when you completed your education. The 10-year time frame does not apply to education. You may also apply for this credit even if your education was received out of country. If your degree is in any other language other than English, it must be translated and evaluated by an accredited evaluation service that does business within the United States. Next slide. Parts of the application, Certification of Work Experience, Part 1. Now we will discuss the certification of work experience. Part 1 will be completed by you, the applicant. Here, we will list the information about your employer, where you gained your experience. If you were self-employed when you gained your experience, please make sure to check the box in line 2. If you are applying for a B general construction license and will be using experience obtained obtained while working on your own property, make sure to mark the box in line 4 and complete an owner-builder construction project experience form that we will discuss later. Next slide. Parts of the application, Certification of Work Experience Part 2. Part 2 will be completed by your certifier. In this section, the certifier must include the dates in which you obtained the experience. They must also select if you were working as a part-time or full-time basis. Keep in mind, if you're working part-time, you will save 50% of the credit for that time, which means you will need to provide 8 years of experience within the last 10 years to meet the 4-year requirement. On line 6, your certifier will need to list the duties that you performed or supervised that are considered critical for the classification that you are applying for. You can read a description of critical duties in CSLB's Description of Classifications booklet available on our website. Do not copy and paste the description from the booklet. This is only to give you an idea of what CSLB considers critical duties for each classification. Your certifier should complete this section in their own words and be as complete and accurate as possible. Next slide. Parts of the application, Certification of Work Experience, final part. The final part of the work experience certification is also to be completed by your certifier. They need to list a relationship to you and provide their contact information. Lastly, they will need to sign and date the certification.
Next slide. Parts of the application, Owner Builder, B General Building Construction Project Experience, Part 1 of 3. The next form we will discuss is the Owner Builder, B General Building Construction Project Experience form. This form only needs to be completed if you are applying for a B General Construction license and you want to receive experience credit for working on projects on your own property. A separate form is required for each project on the property. The experience must be verifiable through building permits, final inspections, and other documentation. You will need to list the building permit number on line 6. On line 7, you will need to provide the scope of the project. Next slide. Parts of the application, Owner Builder B General Building Construction Project Experience, Part 2 of 3. In boxes 8 through 10, you will need to provide more detailed information about the project. Next slide. Parts of the application, Owner Builder B General Building Construction Project Experience, Part 3 of 3. Question 11 asks if other general construction contractors worked on the project and what trades they performed. Remember, this information should be as complete and accurate as possible. Next slide. With all the information we just covered, this is a good time to remind you that we are recording this workshop. We'll post the video on our YouTube channel so you can go back and rewatch it in case there's anything you missed. Okay, so you've got your application submitted. How do you check the status of that application? Here are 2 resources. First, it is the Secured Check. You'll need your application fee number and contractor PIN number to get an update. We'll send you that information after we receive, cashier, and key into the system your completed application. The second way to check is to look online at our processing times. Each week, we update our website with the date we receive the paperwork for a specific process. So, look for the date being worked on and know that if the date shown is after the date we likely received your paperwork, it's likely we're busy working on your application. As you can imagine, CSLB receives hundreds, if not thousands, of documents every day, and we process them in the order they are received. So, be sure to take an extra time getting the application right so we don't have to send it back to you for a correction and then have to start the process of your application all over again. Next slide. When your application has been posted, CSLB will send you a notice to appear for examination and a study guide. You should get your exam notice at least 3 weeks prior to your exam date. CSLB has many authorized test centers throughout California and encourages candidates to take their exams at the nearest test center.
Next slide. If you're an applicant whose first language isn't English and you don't feel confident taking your exams in English, we do allow you to use a translator. The translator who you provide simply reads you the exam questions. Question 16 on the application asks if you need to use a translator to complete the examination. The translator must be approved by CSLB in advance. You cannot just show up on the day of your examination to the test center with someone to translate the exam for you. When you get an exam date, make sure you do not miss it. If you fail to appear for your exam, you will have to pay a non-refundable $100 fee to reschedule. The fee may be waived once in documented evidence of a medical emergency or other circumstances beyond your control. Also, we have study guides available for each of our exams. Included in each study guide, you will find a list of sections and topics covered by the exam. They also include sample questions, how each section of the exam is weighted, and recommended resources that you can use to prepare for the examination. These study guides are available online on our website. There's a bonus link to them on the bottom of the screen.
Next slide. Here is a quick look at 2 of those study exams. The first is the Law and Business exam, which all qualifiers must take, no matter which license classification, including the D series limited classes. You can see the guide contains a breakdown of examination topics, some test strategies, some questions, and resources that were used to help create that exam. Next slide. You will see the same format on the B General Building Study Guide. We would recommend that you really pay attention to the exam content here, especially how we have broken down the percentage of questions there will be on each of the 5 topics on the exam. On the lower right of both of these 2 slides, you'll see bonus links to the actual study guide, as well as a link to the complete list of study guides.
Next slide. We do have COVID-19 procedures in place for applicants on test date. These procedures could change, so check the CSLB website before your test date. Plan to arrive at least 15 minutes early for your exam. Give yourself extra time to get checked in. Applicants are recommended to wear a face mask or other face covering. Check and follow your local COVID-19 mask guidance before arriving for your test. If you appear ill, we will have to reschedule your exam for at least 5 days later at no additional charge. And if you will not be admitted into the test center more than 15 minutes prior to your exam time. We've also produced a short What to Expect on Test Day video that you can watch on our YouTube channel. The link is at the bottom of your screen.
Next slide. You'll take the exam on a touchscreen computer. Before starting, you'll see an on-screen tutorial that will take you through the process. The exam itself consists of multiple choice questions. You'll also see a space on each question where you can, if you want, submit a comment about that question. You'll get 3.5 hours to complete each exam. Don't arrive late, or that may reduce the amount of time you get to complete your exam. You'll get your results at the end of the exam. Next slide. If you don't pass the exam, you will not be allowed to review the questions you missed, but you will get a statement showing how you did on each section of the exam. You can reschedule the exam as many times as you need to within the 18-month period, as long as you pay the non-refundable $100 rescheduling fee each time.
Next slide. After you pass your exams, what happens next? First, you'll need to pay your initial license fee. $200 for a sole owner license, and $350 for a non-sole owner license. And that will be good for 2 years. You'll also need to complete an online asbestos open book exam. Plus, you'll need to file your required $25,000 contractor surety bond and possibly some other bonds depending on what type of business entity you'll have. And you'll need to get your required insurance policy. If you've got employees, you'll need to get workers' compensation insurance. If you're going to be an LLC, you'll also need liability insurance. See our website for more information. Please note that the insurance company or broker can submit your insurance information to CSLB directly on our website. If you don't have any employees, you must file a workers' compensation exemption with CSLB. You can do that online as well. Workers' compensation insurance is required now for all licenses with the following classifications: C8 concrete, C20 HVAC, C22 asbestos abatement, C39 roofing, and D49 tree service classifications, whether or not they have any employees.
Next slide. After your license has been issued, in about 5 to 10 business days, CSLB will send you a wall certificate and plastic pocket card license. Display the wall certificate in your main office or chief place of business. Carry your pocket card with you, especially in situations where you're going to solicit business, talk to potential customers, or sign contracts. We encourage consumers to ask to see your pocket license. If you're going to have salespeople working for you, please be sure to get them registered as a home improvement salesperson with CSLB. Check our website for more on how to do that. The license will be good for 2 years. It will expire on the last day of the month when it was issued. Be sure to put that expiration date on your calendar, in your phone, anywhere you need, so you won't forget it. CSLB will send a renewal notice in the mail approximately 60 days before it expires, but ultimately, it is your responsibility to renew your license on time.
Next slide. Here are a couple of other important deadlines to keep in mind. First, notify CSLB within 30 days if you move or change your business address. Your renewal notice will be sent to the address of record that we've got on file. If you're not at that address anymore, you're probably not going to get it. Plus, the Postal Service will not forward state government mail. Finally, notify CSLB within 30 days of all changes to personnel on your license, especially when it involves the qualifier of the license.
Next slide. Once you get your license and get to work, you might want to hire someone as a salesperson to solicit, sell, and negotiate home improvement contracts on your behalf outside of your place of business. These people are called home improvement salespersons, or HIS. Without an HIS, the official personnel of record on a license are the only ones who can solicit, sell, negotiate, or execute a contract. That includes individual contractors, license qualifiers, partners, corporation officers, and LLC responsible managing officers, members, managers, or employees. A HIS can work for more than one contractor. The licensee must notify CSLB in writing when they either associate or disassociate an HIS with their license.
Next slide. There are a couple of exceptions to note. First are those who only schedule appointments for the contractor or registered HIS. And bona fide service and repair people. These are the folks you call out for repairs, including the things like air conditioning, heating, and plumbing. But those service and repair people are limited to the work that was initially requested by the buyer or homeowner. For example, if your AC goes out and you call an HVAC company to come out, the service person does not have to be a registered salesperson. But if they go beyond the repair itself and sell you a new HVAC system, they would have to be a registered HIS. Also, don't don't employ an unregistered salesperson. That subjects you to administrative discipline, and the salesperson might get a citation or possibly even a criminal misdemeanor. We've got bonus links at the bottom of the page if you want to look at the actual code sections of law. Next slide. So, okay, this is our presentation. Now it's time to answer your questions. I do want to remind you that the questions and answers need to be available to all participants, that when you ask that question, you do have it available to all of us. So, Casey Sanchez, if we are planning on creating a corporation, do we need to create that before applying, or can it be done after getting the license? So, Casey, it has to be done prior to submitting your application. So your registered business name with the California Secretary of State and your registration number is required to be listed on your application. So all of that has to be ready to go before you submit your application, because the information needs to be on your application. James, if you were employed by a contractor in another state where a contractor's license is not required, can you still use this contractor to demonstrate work experience? This is in regard to the C-32 license. That is correct. Your experience can be out of state. We do want to see that the information provided on the certificate of work experience matches what we require of the C-32. So it's just a matter of verifying that information. Is the qualifier required to have a California driver's license? No, they are not. It's not a requirement. I would recommend, though, if you don't have a California driver's license, if you do have an ID card, that you do submit that number on your application, though. Can owner builder experience be used for the B2 residential remodeling classification? No. So owner builder is for the B class only. And this question is from Daniel. The B2 is not something that is permittable and does not necessarily have to be inspected. So no, you're not going to be able to use the owner builder form for that. You would just use the work experience form with a certifier that's certifying the B2 work that you have done. What can be done if a certifier does not want to cooperate? Can I just submit tax documents or pay stubs as proof? Unfortunately, no. All applicants must have a certifier to certify their work. And a certifier does not have to be an employer or a licensed contractor. It's somebody who has the firsthand knowledge of the experience of your, what they saw you do. And again, firsthand knowledge. So they were on site. It's not word of mouth. They've seen you perform the work. And again, it does not have to be an employer or a licensed contractor. Are all license applications required to take and pass the exam regardless of years of work experience and specific license being applied for? So the exams are dependent upon the classification that you're applying for. So if you apply for an A, B, or a regular C classification, then there will be an exam for the classification as well as the law. If you're applying for a D, which is a C61 subcategory classification, that would just entail the law exam portion. But it is based upon your classification that you're applying for. And at this point, without further information, everyone is required to take those exams. How early can an applicant take exam once approved? So once your application is posted, your information is sent to PSI, and you receive notification in the mail where you have to register with them, and then you can pick your date. And it would be dependent upon what dates are available. So you can't say, it would obviously not be the next day, but you would have to wait after you register to see what was available, Casey. Jake, I submitted my transcripts directly to the CSLB. Do I need to resend after I have them sent to me? do I need to fill out a new application and pay an additional $450? So Jake, did you send them prior to your application? Because we only hold on to, as a courtesy, we do hold on to transcripts in a location, but we can't keep them forever. And periodically it is checked. If we don't see something coming in, an application with that name, then we're not going to hold on to them and we're going to send them back if there was an address listed on the transcripts. Your best thing to do, as stated in the workshop, is to have your transcripts unopened, sent in with your application. I would wait if you already sent in your application. And once you receive, if you receive notification from your processing technician, reach out to them and ask them if they received your transcripts, if they were submitted with it, or maybe if you have sufficient work experience, you might not need them. But you do not have to send in a new application and pay another fee if you've already submitted your application and we're just waiting for your transcripts. The solution would be that the transcripts will have to be sent in again unopened. I hope that answers your question, Jake. Christopher, I have a BSBA in HR as well as Master Class 2 Limited Energy Systems license since 2017 in Washington State. I'm assuming that all work will pass right over, and I'm wondering if I can qualify for an exemption on any of those tests. So CSLB, California, does not have reciprocity with Washington State. We do have reciprocity with Arizona, Louisiana, and Nevada only. Chances are, once we review your application, once it's submitted, you will be, and your information is acceptable, you will be required, dependent upon the classification that you're applying for, test for the classification and for the law exams. Daniel, for self-employed contracting experience on small jobs under $500, is there a recommended number of clients to certify work experience? It's dependent upon your dates, Daniel. So if you're going project to project, it's really dependent upon your experience. I can't, if you're 2-day projects, you're going to have whoever was your certifier for that project fill out your work experience. That's kind of a loaded question. You have to total 48 months of experience, which equals 4 years. And if that is made up of a whole bunch of different projects, then you're going to have to submit a certification of work experience per project, and you're going to have a certifier per work experience form that you submit. Parisa, how long after we pass the exam do we get the insurance and bonds in place? So after you pass the exam, you will be put in line for issuance. Dependent on if you've sent in your ILF, which is your initial licensing fee, you will then receive, you should receive a letter after you get your exam stating these are your issue requirements and this is what you need to submit before you can go forward. That letter is going to tell you to pay your ILF. It's going to tell you to get your contractor's bond and your workers' compensation, plus any additional information pertaining to the application that you've applied for. So you do have 90 days from the date you received that letter. I would advise not to get insurance until after, only because you're paying for something that you're not using. And if you want to save a few dollars, wait until we've asked you to put it in place before you do it. If you fail one of the tests, what is the time frame? Heard from the initial or second time takes about 8+ weeks. Again, if you do fail the test, you have to pay the non-refundable retest fee of $100, and you have to schedule that with PSI. I'm not certain it's taking 8 weeks. I think that's a little excessive, but you would have to check with PSI once you've paid for that retest fee, because they would have the calendar open to you and you would be able to pick when you'd get to go back. So it is dependent upon once you've paid and when you're able to go back in and select a new date. Sierra, to qualify for an exam exemption, does being a son-in-law count as immediate family to a contractor's license holder? Well, Sierra, it depends on the circumstances. Are you applying for your own license or are you trying to take over a family member's license? So I need a little bit more information. You could, with your more information, send an email to licensing@cslb.ca.gov, and we'd be better equipped once we know a little bit more information to answer that question a little better for you. Christopher, all work is commercial, government, utility, military, etc., everything but residential. I don't know what your original question was, Christopher. Oh, Washington State. So to have a contractor's license in California, it doesn't matter. You still have to have a license. So you would be required to take that law and the law and the trade, depending upon the classification you're applying for in California. Again, we don't have reciprocity with Washington. If I purchase a property out of state and lived in the property during a 6-month remodel, will this qualify for experience? It could, Ryan. However, again, we can't pre-qualify you. You would have to send in your information in the form of your application with your fees for us to review your application and the experience that's set forth on that application for us to determine whether or not we could pass you on for testing. Sophia, how recent the certification should be dates as? Can you submit work experience certified 2 years ago? So the certification of work experience form should have a current date from your certifier at the bottom of the page. We do not want to see something from 2 years ago. We do need to see something current. Now, the experience could have been within the last 10 years, but the certification being signed by your certifier should be recent, and there should be a recent date on there from that person. How long after we pass the exam do we have to get the insurance and bonds in place? Again, I believe I did answer that. You're going to get, once you pass your exams, you're going to receive a bond and fee letter that states, hey, pay your ILF, get us your contractor's bond, your workers' compensation, maybe your open book asbestos. You have 90 days to do that. And then after that, if we don't hear from you or if it has not been submitted, your application could void in the system and the fees are non-refundable. Are we able to download this after, and how can I do that? You should be able to download this later on our channel or look at it on YouTube. We will have closing information that is on display from our public affairs office that should give you the details of how you can do that. Christian. GS, hello. What is the current processing time that the CSLB is currently experienced from the time the application is submitted? In other words, when we hear from the board after our application submission. So right now, let me go check it. I believe we're about, and I may be over exaggerating, about 6 to 8 weeks. So I'm going to go check it on our website, which you can also do. In the search bar, I put in CSLB processing times. And as of Monday the 2nd, the dates being worked on for original applications, which would mean people who are going to take exams, is 11/17. So the exam applications that were received on this date is currently what is being processed as new. I am from Canada and registered a LLC construction company and have EIN from the IRS. I am general contractor with 12 years experience. Can I apply for a B2 license? You can. Again, your entity has to be registered with the California Secretary of State first. You do need to have a registration number from the California Secretary of State. We don't deal with an FEIN or EIN from the IRS. We just want your registration number. Well, we will check the status of that corp or LLC. If you are a general contractor, and you're asking if you can qualify for the B2, you could, but you do have to keep in mind the B2 is not the same as a general contractor, so there will be limitations on what you can perform. As stated in the workshop, you cannot do new or do repairs on electrical, HVAC. You can't do structural repairs or new structural as far as trades are concerned. Good things that you possibly could as a B2 licensee perform would be, let's say, fencing, drywall, and painting. But again, you can't do any structural work as a B2 if you indeed are a general contractor from another country or state. And it would, there are some restrictions that we listed in our workshop for the B2 classification. But again, 12 years experience, you would have to submit your application with your experience and it would be reviewed and a determination would be made from there. We can't pre-qualify you now. Are the two exams scheduled on the same day or different dates, and how many hours are the exams? So the exams are scheduled on the same day, and I believe the exams are about 3 hours apiece. There could possibly be an option to do the exams on different days. However, once you receive notification from PSI, you register and you'll have to check with them to see if you can switch it up and not do them both together or schedule them together. And again, about 3 hours per exam. Ryan, I have purchased several properties over the last 10 years. 3 of the properties I personally remodeled and have hold as rentals. 2 additional properties I also personally remodeled and sold for profit. Will this qualify for work experience? Again, it could. However, again, we need to see your application and the certification of work experience. If you are going to claim owner builder on the properties that you have remodeled and purchased, you will be asked to provide the owner builder project list as well as the work experience form, in addition to permits and possibly final inspections, so that we can see who did do the work, who pulled the permits, what work was done on the properties, and this is to ascertain if you have the qualifications to move on with the classification you've applied for. So again, owner builder is only for the B classification, Ryan, so you would have to be applying for the B. Otherwise, you would just use the certification of work experience form for any other classification. Lewis, I have a bachelor's degree in business admin and 8 years plus in experience. I'd like to get a licensee as a specialty contractor, tile and ceramic, or get the general contractor's class B2. Does my education count for credits? Does the certifier need to be your employer or not? Does it need to be someone in the trade? So the general contractor's class first is a class B. So let's not confuse. B2 is for remodeling. So we don't want to confuse it with the general contractor's license. They cannot do the same things. If you wanted to apply for the C54 tile and ceramic, or if you wanted to do the B2 remodeling, it is a possibility that your degree can get you educational credit. But again, we have to be able to see this on paper. We gave you a general idea of what kind of credit you could receive from different degrees. However, I can't give you specific information until we have your application in hand. So you could possibly get credit. Your certifier does not, again, need to be your employer. A certifier is someone who has firsthand knowledge of your experience. If you look at the certification of work experience, it can be a business associate, a fellow employee, it can be the contractor, it can be your employee, it could be a union representative. They do not have to be licensed, and they do not have to be your employer. Deborah, what is the renewal fee after the 2 years? So it is dependent upon the classification that you've applied for, as well as your entity. So I would need, let me see if I can pull that up. Give me just a second. So as of January 1st, and I'm just using that as a stepping stone here. Let's see here, reactivation, where's renewal? Okay, so I just see reactivation for a sole owner is $450, reactivation for a non-sole owner, which would mean your other entities, which is a partnership, a corporation, an LLC, is $700. And then they do assess delinquent fees if you do not pay them on time at that 2-year mark, which is 50% of the actual renewal fee. So $450 for a sole owner, $700 for anything other than a sole owner. And then again, your delinquent fee is 50% of the fees if you are late renewing your license. So it is very detrimental that you do keep track of when you expire so that you have that. Casey, do we just need at least one of the acceptable documentation for the application? Casey, I don't understand the question. Could you clarify that? List one of the acceptable documentations for the application. Yeah, I'm not quite sure, Casey, and there's a lot to scroll through. If you could just reiterate exactly what you're asking there. Parisa, do I need to list my realtor broker license on the application? No, it doesn't do anything for your application. We're not going to look at that as part of the experience. Your experience is your hands-on, your supervision of employees. If you work for a contractor, being a realtor or a broker is not going to necessarily give you any kind of experience or clout to that manner. Ryan, if I apply for a B and my work experience is not approved, can I switch application to request the B2? If yes, is an additional application fee required? So yes, you can. So you can change your application before we post your application. Once your application has been posted, which means deemed acceptable, you can't make any changes. If you decide to change it before we post it, there is no additional fee. It is just a correction. You will have to correct it on the first page of your application as well as on your certification of work experience, because the work experience will have to match the classification being applied for, Ryan. Deborah says, thank you. No, thank you, Deborah, for attending. Does anybody have any other questions? Casey, regarding the demonstrating work experience, do we need at least one of the acceptable documentation for the application? So Casey, depending on the classification that you're applying for and how you're applying for it, if you're applying for the B and you're trying to use owner builder, you're going to have per project one certification of work experience form, one project experience form or owner builder project experience form, plus your permits and finalized inspections from the city or county. If it is not owner builder, then you're going to have, if you, let's say you had multiple employers, you're going to have one certification of work experience per employer to total that 48 months or 4 years experience that is required of every applicant. Does that answer your question? Okay, so C33. So a C33, you just need work experience form, the certification of work experience form with a certifier. If you have more than one employer, again, whatever your employment times that add up to the 48 months, which is 4 years, that's what we would need. Parisa, does Bachelor of Architecture count for more than 8 months? Okay, 18 months, excuse me. We'd have to see. Again, we can't pre-qualify you, and I can't give you a definitive answer without seeing the degree with your application. We do have to see that it is a sealed transcript submitted with your application, what the degree is, and how it pertains to the classification that you've applied for. So Parisa, again, we can't pre-qualify that. We would need to have your information in with your application in order to best give you the answer to that question. Again, earlier on in the workshop, we did give you a limited, but information on what possibly could give you this much, credit towards your work experience with education, but it is dependent upon the class that you've applied for and the degree that that you have obtained. Do I need to submit transcripts with a degree from over 10 years ago? Yes, you do. All applicants, if you're going to try to use education as some of that work experience, you will need to obtain a sealed transcript that's going to be sent in with your application so that we can see that this is valid, that it was for this degree, and that it was completed. We will need a sealed transcript from 30 years ago if you have that. And that's just in case an applicant wants to use education. If you don't, then obviously you don't have to submit that. You're welcome. Sophia, regarding the question regarding the dated certification, what is the only person that can certify is deceased? Well, that would be a problem. I would state, because we can't take something backdated. It does have to be pretty current, and I would say probably within the last 90 days. There was nobody else who has firsthand knowledge of the experience obtained. A fellow employee, another person on the job, another contractor that was there. I would, try to find somebody else who might have that, the knowledge of your experience if it's you applying. But yeah, we can't take something that is backdated. We can't take future dated either. So yeah, we would need something dated, like I said, with a current date within at least the last 90 days. Not that there was for the whole 3 years of my experience. I mean, you could submit your experience. However, I can't guarantee that that's gonna that it's gonna be acceptable. And asking the question, me giving you the answer, I would see if I had somebody else who could try to certify you. Ryan, can relatives verify work experience? They can if they have firsthand knowledge of that experience. My suggestion would be that on the certification of work experience, that they check maybe business associate. Do not make a new box. Do not put family member, mom, dad. Check business associate. Use one of the options that we have listed on the certification of work experience. Don't modify it to say that they're a relative, but use one of the predetermined answers there. Destin, for a 4-year BS business degree, can I receive the full 24 months of credit? So Destin, as I explained before, we can't give you specific information pertaining to that. We would have to have, again, your application with your sealed transcripts submitted for review. We did give a little bit of a lowdown on what you possibly could get within this workshop. I would recommend maybe go back through the workshop to see what examples we gave. You could also check our website at www.cslb.ca.gov and type in the search bar, business degree, degrees, education degree, and see what we have listed on the website. But I can't make a predetermination for you at this time. You're welcome. We still have time if anybody wants to ask any other questions. If you're shy and you don't want to, you can send an email to licensing@cslb.ca.gov, and your email will be forwarded to somebody to answer, and we can give you some more information. If you have specific information that you want to list in that and not on here, you can also do that. Submit your your email to the licensing email. Dustin, if you see on the screen right now, there are some credit examples for you. So you can take a look at that. Okay, Ryan, reading through the owner builder requirements, it states the properties are required to be lived in for 12 months. Is this correct, or can be an investment property and potentially qualify for experience? It may state that on our website. However, we're not going to ask you for proof that you lived in the house for 12 months. It's not something that we can, we're not going to ask you for a day-by-day blow of where you lived, what was the address, when did you move out. My recommendation would be to get all your information together if you're applying for the B classification with the owner builder, and you have your project list, you have your permits, your finalized inspections, and your certification of work experience from your certifiers. That's mostly what we're going to go off of. But again, we're not going to ask you for the deed to your property. It's not something that that we're gonna ask for. After I finish my plumbing apprenticeship program, would I be possible to apply for the C36 with a recommendation from my UA local representative? And this is for Christian. You can. What we look for when you have an apprenticeship, so you're going to send us your completed apprenticeship. You would, dependent upon what the apprenticeship is and the classification that you're applying for, receive credit for that. If they don't pertain to each other, you will not receive credit. So you can't, just for an example, you can't get an apprenticeship in drywall and lath and plastering and apply for a C36. You will not get credit for that. They do have to go hand in hand. Your local representative at your union can be your certifier. However, with unions, they send you out to work for licensed contractors. That's who needs to be listed as your employer, not the union. So you went out and worked for ABC Plumbing for 24 months. You know, these were the trades that you performed. Your union representative can sign it as a certifier as long as they have the firsthand knowledge of that experience. But your employer should always be who you worked for, not the union. Sometimes in cases like this, if people send in that, hey, I worked for UA Local 1234, we're going to ask you for union books to show us. And then what that does is shows us that you were sent out on a job for, like I said, ABC Plumbing, XYZ Plumbing, you know, so those are the people you worked for. Those are the people who should be listed as the employer on the certification of work experience. And again, your certifier can be your union representative as long as they have that firsthand credit of that work being performed. Deborah, thank you. I've worked for Christian. I have worked for multiple contractors. Do I have to get all the contractors? So we're looking, Christian, for 48 months, which totals 4 years work experience. If you worked for 2 people, 2 contractors that equal the 48 months, then you just need 2 work experience forms with 2 certifiers. It's all dependent on how much, where the time was spent and what's going to equal up to that 4 years. So you do, you know, if you have 4, if you have 5, then I would recommend you send in all 5 certification of work experience. Maybe you did 6 months here, 6 months somewhere else, and a year the other places. And they would have to have your certifiers. They don't have to be the contractors, but you have to have certifiers for the work that you performed, telling us that they have the firsthand knowledge and explaining in section 2 of the certification of work experience what you performed. What if I've been working self-employed, getting paid in cash for multiple small jobs, all different customers? Do I need all of them, 4 years worth, to vouch for me in writing? Do they need to prove my employment somehow or just state a period of time they saw me do structural framing or employee management, painting, hammering, etc.? So depending upon what classification you're applying for, if it's structural framing, you will need, if you're claiming self-employed, you're going to need to fill out, if it wasn't your own property, a construction project experience form. You will be asked to provide finalized permits and inspection reports. And your experience does have to total the 4 years, 48 months. So if that's multiple sites that you worked with people, then unfortunately multiple certification of work experience forms will have to be submitted with those certifiers. Employee management, I do see that there, or let's say supervising, you would have to work for a licensed contractor in order to get experience for overseeing other people, other employees of a licensed contractor. We do not give credit for overseeing other contractors or subcontractors. They are already licensed and they do not need supervision. So you do not gain, no applicant can gain experience from overseeing or supervising a contractor or subcontractor. So again, you need to maybe be a little more clear when the time comes for you to submit your application. I'm not certain how to pronounce your name. I'm going to say Cal. But yeah, you definitely need to whatever adds up to that 4 years worth that we need for every applicant. Okay. Well, that's like 200 customers. That's what you're going to have to submit. Unfortunately, if you don't have something that was consistent, again, let's use ABC Plumbing. I worked for them for 48 months. You know, I put that on my certification of work experience. I have my certifier fill out the section 2 with him or her explaining in detail what I performed and signing off on it. You know, obviously that would be the easiest thing. However, if you have multiple employers, you do have to submit that to us because we do have to see that. And it is always subject to review. We can at any point contact the certifier to verify the experience. That is within our legal right. So you do want to make sure I's are dotted, T's are crossed, and you have all that information when you submit your application. And, you know, I hate to tell you to submit that many. However, if that's what it takes to equal that 4 years of experience, that's what has to be submitted. If permits, Ryan, are not pulled for owner builder work, will this disqualify? Can proof with pictures, missed sale tax returns, and or title transfer possibly work in lieu of permits? Unfortunately, no. For the B classification, where we do require for owner builder or self-employed, when we require permits or finalize inspections, the work that's being performed requires permits and finalized inspections. If you're not doing the work that requires that, then chances are you are not qualified for the B general building classification. So general B, again, is structural with 2 unrelated trades. So let's say you are retrofitting windows, you are installing plumbing and electrical. So all 3 of those require permits from your city or your county. And that's what the B does. B does major structural changes. If it is not structural, first of all, you wouldn't qualify for the B classification. You could possibly apply for the B2, which does not include structural changes and does not include installation or repairs of HVAC, electrical, and plumbing. But we do not accept pictures. We're not going to ask you for tax returns, transfer titles, or mis-sale. It would, you know, we want to be able to ascertain what was performed at that property, who performed it, and we would need, you know, the documentation to show that you are qualified to do that structural work, that new installation of, like I said, electrical or HVAC. Those require permits. If no permits were pulled, chances are it's not B work. Is building a new permitted deck considered structural? No. So what a B is, it's structural work, however, it's for habitable structures. So a general building contractor's principal contracting business is in whole or partial connection with a structure built, being built, or to be built for the support, shelter, and enclosure of persons, animals, chattels, or movable property of any kind requiring in its construction the use of at least 2 unrelated building trades or crafts, or to superintend the whole or any part therefore. So a deck is not habitable, so that would not be considered a structural that you could use towards the B classification. Let's see where we are at here. Can I obtain the B2 without having the C36? Absolutely. So B2, again, no installation repairs of plumbing, electrical, HVAC, no structural framing. B2 would be, let's say, carpentry. You can build a cabinet, you know, that's not structural. You can paint, you can do drywall, you can do landscaping, you can build a fence, again, not structural. You do not have to have experience for the C36 in order to obtain the B2. But we do want to see those 3 unrelated trades for the B2, you know, minus what we've stated and what the workshop has stated is not acceptable for the B2. Ryan, thanks for the info. Thank you for attending, Ryan. Dustin, if a homeowner is my certifier, how would they fill out number 7 of the cert of work experience? So they put your name, in Part 2, Section 7. So you're the qualifier. And then below that, I think the best option would probably be business associate, unless they want to say that they're your employer because you did do the work for them. You know, it's completely up to them how they want to be listed. If they're not a contractor, obviously you're not going to check contractor. If they're not a union rep, they're not going, or a fellow employee, they're not going to check those. It's going to be up to them whether they want to say they're your employer because they hired you to do this work, or if they want to put that they're a business associate of yours, Dustin. There is nothing to say that owner builder. So, you know, I think one of those two options would be your best or their best road to go by on the certification of work experience form. You're welcome, Christian. Again, if you're not comfortable asking a question here, or if you have more information, maybe that you don't want other people to see, or it's maybe a little convoluted, you can always send an email to licensing@csLB.ca.gov, and then your question will be redirected to somebody who can best answer it for you. So let's give it a few more minutes or seconds. If anybody has any questions that they want to submit here, we can still answer them. Again, as you see on our screen, there are some credit examples for education, just in case. Again, we cannot pre-qualify you, so we do want to reiterate that sealed transcripts with your completed application sent in with your fees, and we can give you a better answer. You know, if you don't need to use education, you don't have to. If you have that 4 years, you know, you don't have to go get that sealed transcript and send it in. If you have 4 years, I mean, submit your application. If you want to use the education, there's just the requirements. Or your apprenticeship, as long as it pertains to the class you've applied for, definitely send those in so you could get educational credit if that's the route that you want to go. Let's go ahead and do the next slide, please. Here you find, again, the B2, what you can and cannot do. Be advised, you know, 3 or more trades on a project, and you are limited to working on existing residential wood frame structures only. You cannot make structural alterations to load-bearing partitions and walls. You cannot install or extend electrical or plumbing, and you cannot install or replace HVAC. Other than that, the B2 is, you know, pretty straightforward. These are just the items that you cannot perform. Next slide, please. Okay, so hold on, I think I saw another question. I've worked as an assistant PM and PM for 8 years plus. For a high-end residential contractor, can I still obtain the general contractor's license? So I am thinking you mean project manager. If you have the experience working for a licensed contractor, then the need would be to fill out your application, submit your certification of work experience with a certifier, and we can go from there. We'll have to see what's listed as your trades. Again, your trades need to be specific to the classification being applied for. And you have to have a certifier. So, Luis, we do need to, you know, 8 years sounds like, as long as it's within the last 10 years, sounds like it possibly could be acceptable. But again, we have to review your application. When does the slide become available to download on the YouTube channel? I am not too certain. Public Affairs does do that. We are going to talk about that in just a second. I don't know if it's like 24 hours, 48 hours. I'm not quite certain, but check our website and that information should pop up maybe Monday, Tuesday. If not, Deborah, send us an email at licensing@cslb.ca.gov, and I can try to get a more definitive answer for you. Destin, are tax records required or cross-referenced for certification of work experience? No, they're not, Destin. We don't ask for tax records. Ryan, is this question and answer portion of the class recorded and provided via email? As far as I know, not provided via email. I'm not certain about, I would think that would be part of the workshop, but I can find out for you if you want to send me an email at licensing@cslb.ca.gov. You can say, hey, please pass this on to Dana, and I can find out that answer for you. So with that being said, okay, hold on. A friend of mine has been building 1/2-inch, 1-foot scaled models of historic houses using miniature wood supplies like popsicle sticks. Could this qualify as work experience for a B class? If this is not a habitable structure, no, it could not be used for experience for B class, the B class. We've actually gotten a couple, hey, we build this to, like the fire department builds something to burn it down for test or for practice for the firemen. That is also not considered a habitable structure. So that person did not receive credit for that because it was a temporary structure that did not house or wasn't habitable. So no, models cannot be used for this. Anything temporary cannot be used for the B classification. Okay, so that's all the time we have today for our workshop. Thank you for all of your questions. If you have any other questions about your application, we encourage you to drop an email to our licensing division. Again, the email address is licensing@cslb.ca.gov. That's licensing@cslb.ca.gov. If at some point you need to reschedule your exams once your application has been posted, you can get that process started by dropping an email to exams, and that's exams@cslb.ca.gov. Next slide. We've also put together a list of available resources for women considering a career in construction. If you haven't already, be sure to download this presentation to get them. You can download the presentation on a green banner on the top of our homepage at www.cslb.ca.gov. If you're watching the archive video of this workshop on our YouTube page, you'll find a link in the presentation down below.
Next slide. We welcome your comments or topics for the future webcasts. Just drop us an email to social@cslb.ca.gov. Special thanks to our Licensing Division and Public Affairs Office for their help in this workshop. The Get Licensed to Build workshop is a copyrighted production of the California Contractors State License Board. Thanks for watching.